You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.
Kate, you are lovely. You are a treasure.
Oh.
Yes.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 23 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can, whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game up to the next level. I am Sarah.
I am Rob, and
Rob?
we are live.
Yeah.
Sup, Knox? Yeah, 23. Yes, we are. We are live with 23. So if you are listening to us live, we appreciate that. If you are listening to us using the app on a device, that's great. But apparently the website is now streaming live as well. So
Yeah, so you can pick us up at Studio 4 at podcastdetroit.com. So if a browser is more convenient for you, by all means, hop on over there and drop in on us.
So we have a final kind of hurrah, I guess, of this world's discussion we've had.
That's world building thing, and I'm sure we'll come back to world building.
I doubt this is going to be the end of everything.
Oh,
So
no, exactly.
yeah.
But yeah, tonight we're gonna be discussing history. It's kind of the last little bit of world building is giving your world a little bit of life and making it feel like it wasn't born yesterday.
You know, like a buff at the very end. You know, a little bit of shine. So, but I think much like a buff and a shine, you kind of have to decide how much.
Yeah. I think I think when I was writing up some of the notes for this, I was expecting this to kind of come across like a little more like our geography discussion, where it was like, yeah, we want to talk about geography, but it almost doesn't matter. You know, just do kind of whatever and like don't stress about it. But
Right.
I started kind of thinking about it, and there definitely are some particulars to it.
Okay, all right.
But I think first to what you were saying, it's not how much you have, but how much you share.
Yeah.
is one of the first things.
And I think that was one of the things that we've talked about in the past of just storytelling in general, is that you have your world history, the description of what has gone on, and that I'm not going to say is irrelevant, but it's a different part of the story. And then you have what is functionally part of the story. And
right.
We have exposition that gives us history and lore and things like that. But that exposition could literally be ignored and you could still enjoy the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, honestly, how much think of your day-to-day life and like how much of like the American Revolution, matters day to day.
I agree.
It really doesn't.
It doesn't, but it's part of the world and it's necessary.
Yeah, there are important things that happened there. There are things that happened there that inform what our nation looks like today. But you know what? On a day-to-day basis, the date that George Washington crossed the Potomac River, doesn't really matter.
So what we're saying, this section that we're about to talking about is literally meaningless.
No. It's far from meaningless.
No,
what I am saying though is wipe that sweat off your brow. Because very much like geography, it seems like a very big thing. Like, oh God, I've come up with a world. I've come up with a snapshot of what my world looks like right now. But now I've got to hit the rewind button for how many thousands of years and figure out. No, you don't.
No,
you don't.
No.
You don't.
I think it comes back to the key word we've pretty much said through the whole thing, which is consistency.
Yeah.
And that is that the history and the lore of your world has to be consistent. It has to, and this is why you write it, is so that from your mind of how everything functions, you can write it down so that you have that drive of why it's functioning that way. Here's the lore behind it. I mean, you create a religion that's based around your gods. So you know the truth. You then need to know what the religion believes, and then you have what is the doctrine. That's the actual lore. Yeah. That's the last thing that goes into the play there, so that's what gets actually doled out to the players. So they're only going to see a tiny little slit of a window through into this vast scape if they stare into it like a keyhole, sure, they'll get a lot of information. Is it important to them? Probably to them personally, but maybe not the whole story. But it's neat. It's a nugget that gives them another facet into it. And it's just a matter of how deep do you look into that world of why it's there.
Sure.
So I think that's a good way to look at it, is that you don't have to paint the entire picture. You have to paint what's visible to your players that will make the setting make sense.
Right. There's also another great quote from a video that you and I watched a couple weeks ago.
Yes.
That I wrote down here, and I wanted to bring it up in this discussion. I've been sitting on this for the longest, because the moment I heard it, I was like, "Oh my god, that is the crux of our history discussion right there."
Yes.
The video was a video on Polygon's channel. Polygon is typically a gaming website, a lot more video game geared. If you don't know about it. There's a contributor to that channel called Brian David Gilbert, and he does a series called Unraveled, where he kind of delves deeply into subjects within video games that are from odd angles, like ranking the sexiness of Castlevania monsters, and things like that. This particular video was called "I Read All 337 Books in Skyrim, So You Don't Have to."
Yep.
And so he kind of broke down the different books that appear in the lore of Skyrim, and broke them into different categories. And he had this whole category dedicated to history. And so he was talking. He's like, most of you probably think that the history books are the most interesting, and I'm here to tell you they're not. And I quote, "History is so boring."
It's true.
J.R.R. Tolkien did the world a disservice by making every single fantasy writer think they need to chronicle every goddamn minute of their world in order for it to be legitimate. I don't give two shits about a king who lost a war 700 years ago. Get out of here.
It's true. It is true.
And that, I think, really kind of sums up a chunk, at least, of this history discussion. Nobody cares about a king who lost a war 700 years ago. So don't feel like you need to go into that sort of depth, unless maybe it's moderately important to a single kingdom, and your party happens to be looking into, like, well, why, what's the history of this castle? I don't know. Maybe you come up with something like that. But
and the whole thing is, like, are you writing a world book?
Yeah.
Like, are you sincerely writing a world book like Eberron or something like that? Sure. Maybe you want to put a note in there that the world's been around for 1,000 years and there's been multiple kings.
Keep it to a paragraph.
I mean,
a paragraph.
Right, but if you're writing this for a campaign that's going to last you maybe a year, come on, people.
Yeah.
Dial it back a little bit here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, all right. So you're going to write some history. You need to know what to do.
All right, hold on. I got to answer this one. Knox, no ancestor of the king needs to bear that shame. They might not care. You know what that is? That's a player who wrote way too much of their backstory. That's what happened with that right there.
What is going on?
He's like the ancestor of a king who might who bears the shame might care, and the answer is no. If you're writing about the 700-year-old, that's a player. You just talked about a player.
Yeah. Yep.
Now, because you know what it is? You know who that is? That's the ranger. He's a ranger with a dark past.
The dark past.
That's right. He's a lone wolf.
A lone wolf, a wolf pack of one.
Because his family was shamed. They took the one ring, and instead of throwing it in the fire, they kept it because it was a gift. Yep. There you go. That's what you just did. You just wrote the backstory of a character. Yep. Nicely done.
Yep.
Nicely done. Love you, Knox. I'm gonna have to knock you on that one just a little bit. I do appreciate the tongue out. So, but no, seriously, for world build, no, put it to the side. Let your characters come up with that, because a character will come up with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, if you've got a framing that there's this dark castles, that litter the landscape because of multiple wars that occurred, and kingsmen joined into these battles and lost their lands. Sure, any one of those could be a backstory to one of the players, and they could write into that.
Right.
But unless you're legitimately building a world book that's supposed to be an add-on to D&D, where you need 700 pages and 75 pages that has to be lore about how the history and the movement of the people and stuff, sure. But again, you still don't need 40 paragraphs on one kingdom.
Yeah, you really don't.
So, yeah. Yeah. All right. So let's talk a little bit about this craziness.
Yeah. All right. So if you are going to write
let's
history,
talk about what we should write.
what we should instead of harping for a half
We
hour.
are totally
on what
harping.
we
This
should
is bad. I don't think we got half hour, maybe 10 minutes though.
No,
Solid 10
but
minutes.
I think our geography episode was about a half hour of us saying don't make
Don't do it.
geography.
Don't do it.
Don't
Just
make geography. Your world
fake
should
a
be,
map.
just go into Minecraft, select flat world.
Start pulling mountains up.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
Was it Populous that you could raise and lower the land in back in the day? The
I
game?
think so I don't think I ever played it.
I loved Populous for that because you could literally terraform live. Like you could raise and lower lands. I know in SimCity you could do it back in the day when you were building
I
the world.
did that a lot in SimCity.
Yeah, I would say that's really what geography is about. It's knowing where things are at, and that's about the level where you need to be.
That's the level you need.
So beyond that, do it in the campaign. Tell them about the high peaks and the cliff edges and sharp rocks at the bottom.
All right, storytellers, focus.
All right. Sorry.
This is the history episode.
That's all right. All right, back to history.
All right, so you want to write history. So here's a couple tips for you. First off, big one. History is written by the victors.
Yep.
You've heard it said before. It is very, very true. So when you're writing history, it is important to keep in mind the difference between what really happened and what people believe happened.
And I find that hard because your first thought is, as a storyteller, is what happened.
Mm-hmm.
You know the truth. And that's what you want to iterate is the truth.
Yep.
But sometimes you have to write down the truth and then figure out what did people believe out of this.
Yeah, and then tell your players the bald-faced lie that everybody sells them.
Right,
Yep.
and then they'll discover what the truth is. And sometimes the truth is different from what you wrote down, and you will scratch that out and write the new truth in.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've done that a number of times.
So what do we mean by what really happened versus what really believe happened?
Right.
So recorded history is going to be colored by the bias of the writers.
Right.
Okay. Is essentially what this comes down to.
What books survived after the Great Fire?
Right, and who gets the luxury of telling the story,
Yeah.
and who lost their part in the power struggle, and therefore whatever truths they believe happened are lost because they're just not recorded or they're actively expunged.
Right.
Kind
Kind of like when, I created the show sheet for this and then you filled it out with stuff and I didn't put anything in it. The victor was you.
Yeah,
And therefore
yeah.
I lost. And that is what our show will be.
the victor is going to be my notes.
There
on
we
the
go.
subject.
And I'm perfectly fine with that. I accept.
Okay, so a couple points to talk about this. Morally gray conflicts are going to be painted as black and white, good and evil.
Yes.
Okay.
I agree.
In reality, you're going to find a lot of moral grayness. And both sides are going to have, in most cases, there are some definite cases where there is a definite bad guy. But in a lot of like political conflicts and stuff like that, you're going to have moral conflicts that are just in gray areas. Both sides have good points, but both sides kind of have jerks on their side,
Right.
and war breaks out.
And the other thing that I think that goes into this a little bit
And that's why
is
diplomacy is so hard,
Right. Nice. Also distance. Like we don't, as Americans necessarily, and I say that in a very global sense, of the Caucasian style, don't have a really good view on England going into India. Like we know they did something there, and if you go into the history from our perspective of what the American authors wrote in the past, it was very British forward. I assure you, we all now know, based on the other historians who have come to our country, since we're such a mixing bowl, we have discovered other things that really occurred in what happened there, and some of the terrible, horrible things that came with this trade agreement and takeover. So distance sometimes puts that into perspective as well, whereas if your world and your campaign revolves around a very small area, the lore that's attached to another area across the sea might see them as heathens or them or the they that are dark and come and attack our shores and steal our women.
And the conquistadors there are going to be painted as, they're just, pilgrims.
Yes.
Who went over there just, to share. And, maybe there was a bunch of pillaging and killing that took place. But we're not really going to talk about that. The history books are not going to mention that.
Correct. The Spaniards went and brought civilization to this peninsula of naked people.
And that actually brings us to the next point. Tyrants may be painted as glorious conquerors.
Exactly. They conquered the new land, the new world.
Mm-hmm. One of a great example of this is in Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series, the Lord Emperor.
Okay.
And he's kind of this god king that rules the final empire.
8 feet tall, wears lots of rings of gold.
Well, I mean, yeah, he's
at least he believes he's that way.
He's in of infinite power sort of person,
right?
Because he's tapped into a particular power source, but that's entirely neither here nor there,
right?
But I mean, he essentially broke the world,
right.
And keeps everybody in a rigid caste system of slavery and awful stuff like that. But he's painted, of course, at least by the ruling class, as this this god emperor who keeps the peace and looks over everybody and provides for everybody, because he was the winner.
Yeah.
So obviously he's the good guy in the story. Random happenstance may be chalked up as divine intervention.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. In actual honest goodness history. Now, I think back to the origins of the word kamikaze.
Yeah.
Okay. Actual honest to goodness thing that happened in real life, to give you an example here. The Mongols were going to come over from China and invade Japan.
Yes.
They got a fleet together.
Yep. Which they've never done before.
Right. And they sailed across the sea of Japan.
Yep.
And most of the way across that, the samurai were all lined up on the shore, and a giant hurricane, typhoon, something or another storm came through and just destroyed their fleet. Mm-hmm. The few that made it to shore, the samurai just quickly mopped up.
Right.
The Mongols decided, well, that was BS.
Yeah.
Let's try it again.
Yep.
I mean, it can't happen twice in a row, can it?
Yep. It did.
Guess what?
Yeah.
So
the God Emperor.
Now there's a lot of and what I've learned too is that there were when the Mongols had conquered China, and so they took on a lot of the native Chinese people as their advisors and stuff like that. Yep. And the Chinese people, of course, didn't want to openly defy the Mongols,
right?
But if they got their ass kicked by the monsoon season, that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And so when they said, advisor, what is the best time to cross the Sea of Japan? You know this land and I don't. They said, I don't know, August?
Yeah.
I told them August.
Which pretty much screwed them.
Yeah, exactly. Or whenever the monsoon season was. I'm sure I got that month wrong.
But regardless.
But you get the point, though. It sent them over specifically during the bad season.
To wipe out their forces.
And what happened was nature did what nature does.
Yeah.
But the Japanese, of course, saw this as divine intervention. Not once, but twice you have the very sea itself rising up to swallow their aggressors.
Regardless of the fact that they are fully aware that the sea does that every year at that time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
But it did all their work for them.
Well,
So
I mean, that was similar to the march in Russia. Mm-hmm. Where it was like Mother Russia protected the Russians during that Great War. Because they literally marched in to a snowstorm and they just waited.
Land war in Russia during the middle of winter. Good job, Hitler.
Yeah,
good job.
Fantastic job.
Yeah.
No. We're not going to say you didn't screw that one up, but you screwed that one up.
Wow.
I mean, but again, you had a very a worthy opponent who took that as a religious moment almost and used that to propel their army of strength. Mm-hmm. To say that this was divine of some way or miraculous in some way.
Exactly.
And we get this all the time. The bullet that nearly killed one of our presidents that didn't. Mm-hmm. That they said that was divine intervention.
Right, because he was protected, et cetera, et cetera. So you're gonna get things in your history that are told like that.
Correct.
Okay, let's see here. There may be others who remember things differently.
Right.
And this is the other key
heretics,
thing. History is full of conflicting historical accounts. Rarely is the truth able to be discovered beyond inference.
Right.
This is called the unreliable narrator.
Yes.
And this is actually one of the things that I particularly like the Elder Scrolls for.
Yeah.
Is that all of the history is told in game.
Yeah.
There is no out of game official meta history of the Elder Scrolls.
Right.
It's literally all just books.
Yeah.
And you can, for any book you find saying an event unfolded in one way, you can find another book somewhere else, and maybe it's not even in the same game, but maybe it's in a different game.
Right.
That tells you, oh, no. It happened like this.
Right.
And you're like, well, but this is literally two different ways for the same event. Well, yeah, because there was two different people who wrote the books.
Right.
You know,
did they like the god or not? You know.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's big things too. Like, are the Akaviri actually snake people? I don't know. There are some that describe them literally as anthropomorphic snakes.
Okay.
We've never seen those in game.
Nope.
But there are books that literally describe them as anthropomorphic snakes.
Right.
Were they dragonkin of some sort?
Yep.
Were they just humans with a snake motif?
Was it someone who looked at some hieroglyphics at one point that showed a snake walking upright and they went, oh, that's what they were like?
I don't know.
Nobody knows.
Unreliable narrator.
That's right.
So don't be afraid when writing your history. And this is a great way of, like, even if you as a storyteller don't know, write a couple conflicting accounts of it and just hand it to your players.
Yep.
They won't know either, and then you're all on the same page.
Yep, everybody's on the same page.
And then, you know, I mean, you can even just do that, like, in game too. It's like, you know, describe parts of your history in uncertain terms. Just it's believed that it was like this.
Right.
Some scholars say
exactly
that it unfolded that way.
Yeah, I will get in trouble if I don't quote this from my wife.
Okay.
And Terry Pratchett is amazing. And he almost always writes the opening of his books or something near the beginning of them. Funny of like the world, everyone believed that the world was created, or at least there are still arguments about that. And one of those, a philosopher, Didackles, summoned an alternative hypothesis of things just happen. What the hell? You know?
Yeah.
You know, where he literally makes fun of the fact that the world doesn't just have one history. That there's all these crazy people who are writing history in their own particular vein. And you have to remember that. You have to remember that the crazy guy in the corner may be honestly telling the truth of what happened, but nobody believes him, even though he is the oldest crone in town.
That's why truth is stranger than fiction, because fiction has to make sense.
Exactly. Exactly. So, one of the things that you had put in here, which I really do think is so totally true, that a lot of storytellers have a hard time with, is, and kids do it better than we do, and that is critical events get glossed over.
Yeah.
So, like, you don't have to explain how a battle ended in great detail. You just have to say that there was a battle and these guys won. Even if they only won with, like, 10% of their army left, and everyone else injured, and the town on fire, they won.
That was a victory.
That was the victory. And you move on from that point.
Yeah.
And everyone just remembers it as a victory because that's what was told.
We fought. We won.
Correct.
There it is. You know, it ignores all things like who fought in the battle.
Yep.
Why the battle was... I mean, maybe why the battle was being fought, but oftentimes that even gets boiled down to those were the bad guys, we were the good guys, so we fought.
Right.
You know, how many people died, just, you know, what the other complicating factors were. Just, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Honestly, if you were sketching out your thing, like there was a war between these two kingdoms, this kingdom won.
Leave it.
You can leave it.
Yeah.
You can leave it right there.
Yeah, unless there's a specific reasons why you need to explain maybe a battle occurred at a certain place so that it can be remembered, or maybe your players finally go to one of the battle zones and it just happened to be at this keep that's just a wreck, you know, a wreck. And someone says, do I know any lore about this keep? Because it happened during the Great War. Write it on the spot.
Yeah, come up with some stuff on the
there
fly.
You go.
There was a mighty king who was a warrior who and just fill in.
Boom. Yeah. Or literally roll your loot table off to the side, look at what's in the loot table, write some lore, done. I find that to be an intriguing way of writing lore, is that when someone asks, let your loot table write your lore. I mean, it's funny.
Have you ever done that to us?
I have. I have legitimately done that, and I have to say that I learned it from Chris Overwatch.
Oh yeah,
because he has these little nuggets of brilliance which are unreal.
Really does.
And I looked at that and I went, "That is super super awesome." Having a loot table literally write your lore for you.
And Overwatch, I don't know if you're listening right now. If you're listening live,
he's not noting. So I'm guessing he's busy doing something else. He's too busy for us.
I want to talk directly to you here, just for an instant here.
Sure,
and I just want to say that, like, I read some of the things that you put in our general chat on our Discord, where a lot of great discussion takes place. You should all join us.
Yes, always.
And But anyways, I hear the things that you do in your games and such like that, and I find myself 50% appalled and 50% amazed because our storytelling styles are so different, and there are things that I would never do in my games that you're like, you should absolutely always do this thing, and I'm like, how do you even? And then I kind of just sit there and scratch my head and go, you crazy bastard, that might just work. Like,
exactly. And it's not crazy on his story. And I guess that's, I mean, in the crux of it all, that is the thing that this whole podcast is about, is that there's a lot of different styles.
He and I are complete polar opposites, and both of our storytelling styles work well.
They
do.
They do.
And
you both have things to add to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I had that revelation earlier today, and I wanted to put that on the air and on the record.
There you go.
Thank you.
There you go. That was your 5 minutes of and Knox is cheering you as well.
Hey.
You should add him, make him jump in the channel. So yeah, but let's get back to this. So glossing over things, you win, there's a loser.
Mm-hmm.
You don't necessarily even have to go into detail. Don't try and explain it unless it is plot specific.
Mm-hmm.
Always keep the lens of your plot to the plot. If you're writing world history, gloss it. Make it shine.
Yep.
Give it a little bit of an edge. If the players can see it in the distance, if that mountain in the distance has a name, that's great. Leave it at that. Don't explain why it's called the spine tooth kraken. Like, great. Why do they call it that? Okay, you make a lore check. A kraken was seen on the other side, and in the night when the sailors were sailing, they thought it was a kraken in the water when it was actually just a mountain, and that's how it's got its name. Done. There you go. There's your lore.
There you go.
Wonderful. Instead of going into great detail about the name Kraken and where it actually comes from, and that it was a failed naming, and whatever. You don't have to do that. Don't go crazy.
Nobody
don't drive
cares.
yourself nuts.
Nobody cares.
Yeah. Honestly, that your players will probably never even notice about it. So,
all right. So we talked a lot about big world stuff. But keep in mind that history happens everywhere. It's not just big world changing events, but even groups have history. Now we did a whole podcast on coming up with groups in your society and stuff like that. But keeping it, I did say that at the time, that the history of those groups was a separate discussion.
Yes.
And so here we are. So for instance, you've got a thieves guild.
Oh yeah.
That thieves guild did not sprout up overnight.
Probably not.
Okay. So things to keep in mind is who created it?
Yeah.
When was it created? Okay. How long has this thieves guild been along? Did it sprout up overnight? Or is this like the thieves guild that's literally been operating this city for the last 1,000 years?
Yeah.
What was the original intent of the guild?
Right. Was it because there was just random assassinations happening and they decided, hey guys, we're all good at our jobs, but we're not just going to let randomness dictate everything.
Right. Or was it more of a Fight Club thing of hey, that thing you're doing is kind of cool. Can I join?
Or the other one that always got me was there was so much strife between multiple communities that they decided that attrition would destroy the community. So they decided that
some rules and order.
The way that it had to happen was if you've got a beef with this guy, you must go to the Assassin's Guild and get your contract, and they will take care of it cleanly and easily.
More egg tong, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it works. It works. But I liked, again, I'm going to go back to Terry Pratchett because in 7th Sea, there's a lot of scenes, and one of the things that a lot of things happen, specifically in the 7th Sea style, is you show your enemies. You show other scenes that your players aren't in to add flavor. So, literally, you can talk about a scene where this character is walking down a hallway of portraits and objects of a dagger, the broken end of a spear, a cup, a portrait of another guy, and it's underneath each one of these portraits is just a year to another year, but they're maybe 2 years apart, and then one of them has a date and it doesn't end, and the portrait isn't in the frame, and then the door opens and the name of the guy in the portrait is exclaimed into the room that someone's waiting for you. And his butler's I'll see him in a minute. And he's just well, I brought tea for both of you. Excuse me? And the guy's sitting in the room waiting for him. And you're oh crap, this guy's good. And that's the whole thing is that you're setting up those moments, and your players know there's a long history of high thieves or high assassins in this guild, and I've just laid out the fact that this guy has lived long enough to be in that position, and somebody just snuck up on him. So this guy is a huge cantankerous badass when it comes to stealth. So you're set those kind of motions. in the history. Like, have that down that you know what your players need to know. So when they ask those lore questions about things that are directly infaced in the game, that you can give them direct lore instead of, hypothetical things or on the fly things. That these are good nuggets to hand off and be with. And be part of your actual story versus the world in general. But if you've got exposition about something that's just outside of the plot, sure, talk about it in that sense that, the Thieves Guild has ran this district for the last 300 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
And kept order and peace between the gangs that fight literally on a regular basis, like for the last 300 years. And you're like, whoa, like, how can 300 years worth of gang violence be going on? The Thieves Guild keeps it in order. Yep. Which seems weird, but works,
One of my favorites, and again, harkening back to the Elder Scrolls series, because it's my wheelhouse currently, is the Vigilance of Stendar.
Oh, God.
It's a discussion that kind of came up about your character because your character follows Stendar. You're a cleric of Stendar in the setting.
I do.
But we are playing in the Third Era.
Correct.
And so people were like, oh, Stendar, aren't those guys a bunch of assholes? And I'm like, yeah, they are. But not yet.
They will be.
They will be. So what happens with the Vigilance of Stendar? For those of you not familiar with the setting, the Stendar is the god of mercy, and his followers are basically peaceful and charitable hospitalers.
Sure.
They give mercy to those in need of mercy.
Yep.
So what happens in the fourth Elder Scrolls game is something called the Oblivion Crisis. The gates between our world and Oblivion are torn down, and the Daedric Prince of Destruction and Revolution basically starts opening up gates all over the place, which shouldn't be allowed to happen. Evil, vile Daedra demon things start spilling out everywhere. Right. And now the game takes place in the province of Cyrodiil, but it's understood that this is taking place all over the world.
Right.
It just happens to be that the snapshot we get is Cyrodiil.
Right.
And so all the other nations in Tamriel are affected by this thing happening, and some of them really don't fare too well. And of course, nobody sees this coming because it shouldn't be able to happen.
Right.
But events take place that allow for it.
Sure.
So Joe Schmo on Somerset Isle or off in, elsewhere, or up in Skyrim are just minding their business one day, and all of a sudden a gate opens up and Daedra starts spilling out.
A giant purple gate opens up like a navel of a peach, and out pours juice.
Yes, and out pours demons essentially.
Yep.
And so it really changed the face of Tamriel, for the worse in a lot of ways. And so what happens is after the Oblivion Crisis, all the these Knight Hospitallers, these followers of Stendar, decide that they're never going to allow this to happen again, and they form a group called the Vigilance of Stendar.
Right.
And that's who you see in the fifth Elder Scrolls game, Skyrim, where you've got these roving bands of religious zealots who will just murder anybody who they even have a slightest inkling of dealing with Daedra.
Yep.
Because they've sworn never again. Yep. And they're willing to just enforce that.
Yep.
So that's a little, you've got this group. Just think about okay, what put that group in that? So you want violent religious zealots. So what makes them violent religious zealots?
World burned.
How did they become that? What drove them to that? You know?
Yeah. I tend to agree with that. Those who don't believe in mercy must believe in fear.
Yeah,
nice. That's pretty solid.
That's a good quote, Knox.
That's pretty solid. So, but yeah, I'm willing to bet if I was sitting at the storyteller table with those guys and they were trying to figure out okay, the world just went to hell. All right, how does everybody fare? And someone was just like, well, I'm sure there's going to be at least one religion that's going to want this, not on my watch, kind of thing. I'm like, well, how are you going to handle that? Well, we're never going to let anybody talk to Daedra again. Oh, okay.
So what are you going to do if they do?
Murder them,
probably.
Yeah. Torture them to find out who else they talk to.
Can't talk if you're not alive.
That's right. Cut your tongue out. Do those kinds of things. Shit, which group would do that? I don't know. Which group would be less likely to want this to happen again? Okay, let's go with that. Yeah. And that's really, when you start boiling down the list, if you were to look at that world, Yeah, more likely it would be Stendar who'd probably step up and say never again.
Yeah, well, especially since in that setting, Talos is so embattled, but that's a whole different other discussion. But.
Yeah. So again, just what we're trying to boil down to is if you've got a specific group that's important, if you've boiled your who's down to the area that you're working in, have a history of what's going on with them.
Yeah,
know them. No differently than in the individual campaign, you'll have a named person and you'll have a history of knowing what's going on for them. But know a little bit about what's going on with that group, how they got established, and what's important to be explaining.
And I would say too, it's probably best to work backwards. You create your group, freely. Create what you want them to be, where you want them to fit in your story, modern day,
right?
And then do your thinking about like why are they in this particular position? What interesting things can I put in their history to make them have come to be where they are right now?
Yeah. I mean, you might have, I'll give a good example. You might have an image in your mind that the players are going to come across the Order of Wizards. And you're like, great. So I have the Order of Wizards. That's who live in this city, right?
I'm into it.
And the Order of Wizards are old. They're all old. There's no young ones, right? And so they're all gray and old and powerful, right? So that's the kind of image I want them to come across, right? I want these guys to be like, 50th level characters effectively, unbelievable power, but like they're not really attached to the world. Great. That's fantastic. How did they get there? Where did they come from?
Right.
You don't just get old. I mean, you could, but you're not going to get 50th level. Power level kind of stuff from just standing around or standing at the edge of a king waiting for something to happen. You get a lot of viziers that way who have fake power and fake a lot of the magic that they're doing, but you don't get that kind of level of power. So build a little history. Okay, so maybe these guys are old wizards who have been all over the world. And they're all here for a reason because they know something more than everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the reason why they've stuck their power base here is maybe this is where their shit is. Like this is where they keep all their stuff, And so there's quite a bit going on. And maybe there's a college underneath them that they like to support. There's other wizards.
Maybe it's a ley line nexus.
Yeah, exactly. So work your way backwards.
Maybe they've imprisoned something underneath their tower. And
exactly.
They built their tower on top of it so no one could be able to unearth it.
Correct. Hey, if you've got a bunch of 500, 50th level wizards and then another 500 acolytes who are trying to become them, any bad things that are going on around that could be explained away as lessons, no big deal, but that beholder is going to stay right where he is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
All right. And then I think I got our last tip here.
Let's do this because we've got some questions we've got to hit.
Yeah.
20 minutes to hit them.
And it's a short tip.
Okay.
And that is just be careful not to make your history too intrusive.
Oh, yeah.
There is a point at which your world building and history are so specific and so based around historical figures that shaped your world that you're no longer creating a tabletop RPG.
Nope.
Okay. This is called writing a book.
Yep.
Or a movie script.
Yep.
And it is a wonderful thing. But it is not a tabletop RPG.
Yep.
Side eye at you, Aeonverse. You hear me talk about adventure and Aberrant and Trinity, and it is a wonderful system. It's a wonderful universe with very rich lore. Some might say too rich of lore.
Yeah.
The main characters that have shaped that world are very prominent, almost inextricable from the world building itself.
They're pillars.
Yeah, they're very strong pillars in it. And it's almost like your characters don't matter to an extent in the story if you pay a lot of attention to the world building.
Okay.
Because these potent characters move the world so much in absence of anything your characters want to do that you almost have to throw out at least some of the lore to be able to play any of the Aeonverse games and allow for your characters to be anything more than bit characters dancing around at the feet of Maxwell Mercer or Divis Maul or Caestus Pax, who are the bigger movers and shakers in that system.
I would say the same thing for 7th Sea, but with a twist on that. 7th Sea has these ominously large villains and unbelievably elegant heroes, but they are so big that their focus is on a task like defending the seas between these two nations, and that's all they can do. But they can't take care of the little things or the side things or follow things.
Right.
So I think in that world, in Aeon, it is a fixed world of a certain size, and they are master puppeteers and in control of too much. Whereas with like 7th Sea, we have, the princes of Adachi who control their lands and are fighting amongst each other and are villains in their own rights, but within them is this elaborate array of individuals who are all having their own little subplots, but none of those characters' subplots are longer than 3 or 4 paragraphs.
Yeah.
So there's holes all riddled throughout it and questions to be asked that only a storyteller who looks at that setting and says, I know why that guy's doing that now. I've come up with a reason why that's going on. And that's the beauty of writing just enough and not getting too finite. And so I think that's where Aeon and 7th Sea separate, where you do have this mass, like there are hundreds of NPCs in 7th Sea that are already pre-written, but they have such little actual background and story about their motivation stuff that it gives you a flavor of who they are and why they're where they're at specifically, but doesn't tell you anything more.
Yep, exactly. And I think, like I said, the Aeonverse takes that one step too much further, where it's like, here's essentially a book that we wrote about these main characters all interacting.
Yeah.
And this section details rules on how you can make a character to interact in their book.
Right.
On
a story that has a defined timeline that will go in this direction.
Right.
Where 7th Sea's like, yes, the French king did send 200,000 troops into Usura, into the Russian capital, and knowing full and well that they're probably not coming back because he wanted to get back at their commander. And one of the storylines is he should know the commander. Go tell him. And so you're going to go tell him and start a revolution or not or something. It's up to you. And as a storyteller, there's a lot you can do in that.
Right, but they leave it dangling.
Way dangling.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a terrible participle. All right. Questions. Ellie Mae, you had a question.
Ela May.
We want
You have
this.
been so patient. You've waited like a month.
And now we're just going to blow over this question like it's nothing.
No, we're not. It's a good question. It's a really good question. It's why we kept it around so long.
Go for it.
All right. So Ela May asks, a long time ago, when building your world, how much history is enough? How do you like to approach history of your world? Single timeline for each faction, only bullet points that thing happened, and how much do you expect a player to come in knowing, or how do you convey this history to new players that are late to the party? So I think we touched on a bit of the first stuff,
definitely
already. How much history is enough to make the world feel lived in, but not enough that you're just reading a history book.
Right. Explain the view from what the players see.
Yeah.
Like, I was born, I grew up to my certain age. What did I learn about the world in that experience?
Right. We discussed earlier environmental storytelling.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important when it comes to history.
Yes.
So if you have an ancient kingdom that you're rolling around in, describe the buildings as old. Don't sit here and tell me this kingdom is 3,000 years old. Tell me that I can feel the age in every paving stone as I walk across it.
Yep.
That the bricks in every building look old and worn and rebuilt and worn again and rebuilt and worn again.
Explain it like Venice, where you can feel that this city has literally been built on top of itself a dozen times. And that when you go into the waters as a diver and dive down even 50 feet, you're scared for the entire city because you see nothing but a sea of pillars.
It's that old adage, show me, don't tell me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How deep do you let the players go? I mean, literally, that's the kind of feel you get.
Yeah, and I think what you said earlier is very important too. Is tell it from the player's perspective. Okay.
Yep.
I can sit here and I can read you a history book on this 3,000-year-old city, but maybe your players don't know that.
Probably won't.
It's probably
most
not
of them.
even important to them.
Yeah, I mean, in some worlds, I've read books where they've talked about, like, if none of your players have a single dot in history or lore, give them the base races and basically how their race looks at the other race, and leave it at that.
Yeah. So how do you approach history in the world? Single timeline for each faction, or only bullet points of what thing happened? I guess it really just depends. Like it's kind of a combination of all of those. You kind of want to have a single timeline because there's going to be a certain narrative that your world may take.
Yeah.
But also there are a bunch of little stories that happen in there. And
you might also want to do. I would probably, if it was me, I would do my first draft would be just a bullet point history timeline of what's important in events that I consider plot that lead up to contemporary. And then I might take that list and break that list down to what people know and make a new list. And that's what I'll talk to the players about.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's probably the best answer for that. So how much history do you expect a player to come in knowing? And I think this is a real great, like, this is the crux of the question, I think, right here. This is the one I was really excited to talk about. Because that's always a little wild. Like, I know a bunch of you guys came into my game not knowing a lot about the Elder Scrolls universe. Right. I think Sean was the only person who'd really ever Sean and Matthew.
Yeah, Matt,
but Matthew also joined later, though.
Right.
So,
and I have a glistening, like, I know of the world.
Yeah,
but like
tangential knowledge.
Exactly, because I played several of the games, but like I'm not a lore master by any means. Like I can recognize things, but that's about it.
Right. So I would say, how much do you expect a player to come in knowing? I would say probably enough to understand the very broad overview.
Right.
Like, for instance, if America were a fictional place.
Sure.
Okay, and we were setting a D&D game there, I might say, okay, so this is set in the country of America, where it's a relatively new nation. A lot of the other nations have thousands of years of history. America was founded by settlers only like 250 years ago or so. And there was some contention with the native folks when the settlers came over. There was primarily a revolution against this other nation where settlers came over from England and they had set up there as colonies, but then decided that as those colonies grew, they wanted to be independent. There was a revolutionary sort of war that took place, fighting for their own independence, and eventually they came out on top. And they've had that strong sort of spirit of independence ever since. Yeah. Of being kind of indomitable and such like that as they spread out and populated their own nation and whatnot. So here we are 250 years later, and that's kind of where we are.
Yep.
That's how I would introduce us to a new player. And I would say that's it. That's the broad overview,
Right. And then if a player decided to make an individual character, like, hey, I'm going to make a character of himself. Okay, a few things independently based upon where you're from. These are the types of things that go on down there. These are the types of industries that existed. There's certain areas. There's a certain feel on certain types of people who are in those areas. But also be understandable that there was also a civil war that also occurred that the South kind of lost, to say the least. Yeah. And that's been kind of a gray crock point for the entirety of the nation, but they feel it differently. And here's their perspective on that. And just go with that kind of thing. And so I always like I always add in once a player starts making into a character, you could say,
then start filling in blanks. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And then how do you convey this history to new players that are late to the party? The exact same way as you'd introduce it to a new player.
Yep.
With the addition of, quite possibly just letting them, know a little bit about what the party's done so far. Maybe, just so they don't feel completely, but more as a player and not more as like what your character
meta.
Know.
Yep. Yeah. Get the separation between meta and history. You might even hand them like, hey, when this group came into town, there was a little bit of a scuttlebutt because they knew them as the Warrior Five, who took out this person and blew a ship up in the harbor. Oh wow! Okay, so I know them as this heroic bunch of crazy people. Whoopsie. So so that's I would go with that as well.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, and definitely separate between meta and player and character knowledge.
Yeah.
All
right.
Yeah,
I think we need to hit Mad and keep going.
All right, Mad Elf.
All right. How do you define where classes fit into the history? Excuse me.
And
History of the
This
world.
is for games where character classes exist,
Yeah.
like D&D.
How do warlocks and sorcerers fit in the world in comparison and contrast to wizards? What are monks in a world? Are there historic world building underpinnings for bards and druids? What kind of world politics led to thieves guilds and fighters guilds? I think we kind of tapped into this a little bit with the last thing we were talking about. I would say it only fits when it's necessary.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I don't like class-based systems, honestly, because they put rigid definitions on people. And I don't think that's terribly I mean, these are professions, more or less.
My thought is that I think classes are there for a mechanic.
Yeah.
They're not a term used.
Right.
Like, I don't go around calling someone, yes, plumber, come here.
Right,
That's
exactly.
not it. He's Terry. He's good at plumbing. He also happens to be quite an accomplished horseman as well. Mm-hmm. And that's just the way things go. But I'm not gonna wizard. I liked it. I like the arguments that come out of some of that. Like, for instance, Memnon arguing with the spell beggar. I think it's fantastic.
That's cleric. That's a derogatory term for cleric because they beg their god for spells.
That's right.
For those of
that's
you
right.
who didn't get that.
Yeah. So, but the whole idea is that I think there can be some history to it if a class was formed because of an event. Like, if I am a dragon born as a class, there was an event in history that may have triggered that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or if all thieves are part of a thieves guild, if they're in this area, and if they are not, they are considered X, like, so in that case, you are not part of the guild, and therefore you cannot slay in the city.
Right.
Those kinds of things. So I would say there can be ties to world history, but I think I think you have to be careful about a class versus a type of person.
Yeah.
Their profession or what they do.
I agree.
So,
all right. Next up, Knox in the Box. Hello. Asks us, is there a preferred world building order that best helps creation of your geography, or does it depend on the story you're telling? For example, writing your pantheon first if you're going to tell stories about how the gods shaped or were believed to have shaped the land. Or maybe you're writing a history first to explain the world that was shaped by centuries of events perpetrated by the life forms, trends, or magics of your world. I'm gonna be dead honest with you. I think it goes a lot more to the story you want to tell, where your starting point is.
yeah, you already put me to sleep. I'm sorry. What were you talking about?
No, buddy. Hey.
No, I'm with you, but at the same time, I'm going to say, start. I guess it's just me. Start from your story. I mean, if you're starting from the world, start from that. Like, what's the ripple effect?
Yeah, what was the part in your muse? What muse spoke to you and said, "Hey, you need to write a story about this."
Right? Did you see a picture? Like, I had a great one at the dinner table with you tonight. I had an image of a girl who scarred herself.
Yeah,
and I created an entire world for the reason of why she did that, and just expanded from there. And it was for a different discussion, but it was very easy for me to immediately go from that one act as a ripple to create an entire history of why events occurred to get to the point where a girl would scar herself.
Absolutely. You're not gonna do one particular thing and then move on to the next particular thing. I know we broke this up into like distinct pieces.
But that was just to help us define what we were doing.
Right. Yeah, it's not like you do your gods first, then you do your world history, then you do your land. It's more like so I had this idea for this world that has these very, very potent gods, and they're very present, and they've warred amongst each other. And so you kind of start defining your deities because your deities are now characters.
Who's your deity?
Yeah. Who is your deity and what does he do? And we got Kate with that one.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. But yeah, I would say hit your muse, your ripple,
right.
And go from there.
And maybe they've got some history, and then maybe because these gods are fighting all the time, there is a part of the land that is scarred.
Yeah.
So now you've got some geography that's come out of that, and
Right.
and look, literally we haven't left the. There are these gods and they fight.
Or secondary, you draw you see a map of something, and you're like, why is there a giant chasm here? And you're like, because there were gods fighting.
Right.
Or maybe people thought there were gods fighting, and now you have that. exactly. Shattered Plains, perfect example.
Yep.
It's like, why do people believe that there are dragons in this area? Were there actually dragons in this area or not? So it's all about your muse and ripple point. Go with that.
Yep.
All right.
So Technolich asks us, how much history is too much? Is there a point when you've made so much backstory for your realm that it prevents further movement and changes in the setting?
Yes.
Yes and no. There is a point where it's too much.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, anything more than when your players start getting bored, that's too much. Like, honestly, anything we talked about this earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Just give them bullet points, and if you need to go into detail,
don't write a book.
Detail. But the only reason I say yes and no is because is there ever a point which it prevents further movement and changes in the setting?
No,
because you're the storyteller. If you need to change it, change it.
Yeah, you have ultimate control. And the other thing is how narrow is narrow? How broad is broad, just what it sounds like.
Yeah.
When it starts getting too much is when you start talking about individual towns and people in said towns, and you've gone into detail about people who have existed in the past, down to like the time that they pooped.
And they met at the cliffs of Nikleflik, and they made a friendship there, and that,
Okay, that's boring.
Yeah.
But I think the problem that you run into is when history meets modern day, and you've made decisions about how the future will go.
Mm-hmm.
When you start getting to that level, you are starting to go too far.
Yeah.
If you know that this is the way things are going to be, be careful. Your players will ruin those ideas.
You can't, because your players will ruin everything.
Yep.
And keep in mind too, like if you need to if you have put something out there and you need to retcon it, unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
Well, but this goes completely against the history you told us. Yeah. Gee, I don't know. Some scholars believe that's what you should know.
Yep.
Some scholars believe it happened this way.
Yeah.
I don't know.
What the heck?
Maybe there's a translation error. Who knows?
Yep. All right.
Knocks in a box.
Knocks out another one.
Comes back around with us.
I've always believed that fantastic things like comic superheroes are at their most realistic when they are made of ink, because the more detail and realistic something is, the more the absurdity of the fiction subject is questioned. Where do you feel the balance of realism and fantasy lies in the scope of your world's history? God, you have these questions.
It's like philosophy 101 with Knox.
First off, I think that history is gray and soft and malleable, and something that players will have an opinion on, and so will the book itself. So it's biased whichever way you look at it.
Mm-hmm.
The realism comes in the story. That's the key. That's when you get into gritty details and truths. Because history needs to be malleable and viewable from multiple points, and something that you can change, because your characters the players involved have histories that you are not part of. They're going to write those.
Yep.
I mean, yeah, you could hand them histories, or you can give them an area or something, but you want them to be invested. Mm-hmm. So you want them to create something, and they're going to add something to your world. At that point, your history is malleable. The realism comes into when you attach that history to your world and make it real. Yeah. That's plot. That's the story driving the realism. That's the final ink that makes them real.
Absolutely. I'm going to agree 100% with that. And the only other thing I'm going to add is I used a lot of very flowery words here, but the core of your question is where's the balance between realism and fantasy? Pretty much in everything is consistency.
Yeah.
The only thing you need to reconcile realism and fantasy together is consistency.
Yep. All right. Let's hit Chris here, which is
last one.
What bit of game world history or lore has been overlooked? Is there any particular setting or mythos that you always wish would be more fleshed out, but not much was done with it? All the time, and at the same time, I don't kind of wish it was fleshed out. Like in 7th Sea, I wish I would know more about the Fae, but at the same time, I don't want to know more about the Fae because I've made up things. And that's the difference for me. That's the part, is that we've kind of said, I think it's come to a point where as a kid, I wish I had more information because I was reading it like a book, but as a storyteller, I don't want to know more.
Yeah.
Because if I know more, that means the player knows more because they can read it.
Yeah, I'm gonna come back around to the Aeon verse on this one. I'm gonna give pretty much the exact same answer. Like there are holes left in that plot, because they wanted to leave things open ended. But yeah, I also kind of don't want those answers.
All right.
Because I think if you fill it in too much, then it just becomes a book.
All right. Roll us, Kate. Our next week topic. Guess what? It's your questions and Discord topics. We're going to review things that we talked about in the past, and that you talked about in the past, and that we questioned in the past, and maybe we have more questions come in.
Yeah, we had.
It's going to be a question session.
6 solid episodes of us talking for 50 minutes and then panicking in the last 10 minutes trying to answer everybody's questions.
Yeah. So we're not going to do that.
Yeah, we're not going to do that. We're just gonna. We want you to throw us at them on Discord. Up on Twitter as well.
Yeah.
You can find us on Twitter at st_conclave. We're up on Instagram at st_conclave as well. And the Discord link is not only up the pinned tweet on our Twitter, but also you can find that in the episode descriptions on your favorite podcast player as well.
Yes.
Every single episode will have the Discord link in there as well. So please join us on Discord and shoot some questions at us.
Yeah. Become a Patreon member at patreon.com, just like Knox on a Box did. And you will get your name listed here as well. Our intro music is Beyond the Warriors by Guy Frog. Guy Frog. And you can find him at Guy Frog Music at .weebly.com. Our outro music is Only Footprints in the Sand by Midair Machine. Thank you, Kerry Washington. We play here at Podcast Detroit Wednesdays, and our engineer is Kate. We'd like to thank our families, Vicky and Sean. Thank you so much for letting us do this, and all of our friends.
And all of our listeners. Thank you so much. We love you all.
Love you guys.
Good night.
Night.